Hey everybody, welcome and thanks for being here. If this is your first webinar with us, we're super excited to have you. And if you're coming back for more, then welcome back. We have some great things in store for you. My name is Laura Bolio. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Holistiplan, and I am joined by Megan Dowd, the amazing Megan Dowd. In case you missed it, Megan is now officially a part of Holistiplan, which we are absolutely psyched about. She is the
Woohoo.
Director of Product and Insurance. She has 4 very specific designations, each related to specialized knowledge in different areas of insurance and wealth management. And so what we're talking about today is a topic that's becoming more and more urgent as we speak. We're talking personal liability. So before we dive into it, yes, this will be recorded. Yes, we will send out the slides afterwards within the next day or two. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them into the Q&A and we'll address those as we go. And if there's any that we don't get to, we'll send out a recap email with answers to all of your questions. So please feel free to engage. We love when you engage with us. We love all your questions. So with that, Megan, I'd love to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much and appreciate everyone attending today. So just a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for 15 years. I wrote a book. I think in today's marketplace, there's just so many different challenges and really not a lot of unbiased information for consumers, heads of households, really, and even advisors to kind of look to. So that was really the passion and focus when I wrote that book. And then obviously, Laura mentioned the education, which is one reason I love doing these webinars, is just helping people better understand what personal insurance even is. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into that personal liability. And then when I'm not dealing with insurance, I love being around my family. I have 2 young children. I also enjoy riding horses and reading. And a lot of people ask how I got into insurance. And like most people, I stumbled into it. But I did learn at a young age insurance was important because I was the bad driver. And I say this tongue in cheek because when I was a young kid, I just remember saying, well, just call Geico, just call Progressive. And my parents just explaining very quickly how that's not always an option and the right coverage and the right liability can make a difference in really protecting everything they were building when I was a young driver. So today, when we talk about liability, we're going to take a deep dive into what it is, just understanding a better idea of how it provides protection to your clients. We'll talk through real life claim stories because being able to understand how drastic liability can be in your clients' lives when there is a claim, I think is important. And these numbers will just help highlight how quickly it can escalate. And then obviously the solutions, because the idea behind insurance is to transfer the risk that the client isn't comfortable covering and or maybe doesn't have the financial ability to cover. And then lastly, just some advice on how you guys can start to implement this, one of those being the amazing tool that we're building out here at Holistiplan. So the first thing we'll talk about is just again, what is personal liability? And I think the biggest thing I can say here is we never want to eliminate all of the risks from your client's life, whether we rather want to help them manage it. So when we talk about personal liability, it's going to cover injuries that happen on your client's premise. Maybe they damage someone else's home, and then injuries caused by pets. The pets can get a little sticky, and we'll talk through some of those exclusions later on in this review. But this is really where we see liability make a big difference. It also is going to cover or it's going to be provided in homeowners and then as well as some auto coverage and personal excess liability, which is also known as an umbrella. So when we talk about, the different coverages, the first is bodily injury. So this is going to be for, again, illnesses, if someone has a major injury, and or it can also help pay, as we'll talk about those legal defenses. So maybe someone says that their injuries are worse than they are. The legal defense can help make sure that your clients are in the insurance company are paying the appropriate amount for those damages and they're not stuck hiring their own defense team on the outside. Property damage. This is one that's often overlooked, but this, when we talk about property damage, an example would be maybe you are the fun house and you like to shoot off fireworks for the 4th of July. And unfortunately, the firework lands on your neighbor's house, catching it on fire. The personal liability for that negligence of shooting off fireworks would cover the damage caused to the neighbor's home. So this can also be if a tree or specifically a dead tree falls on your neighbor's home in those situations. Personal injury is one that's overlooked again and sometimes does need to be added to a policy, but this is going to be for things like libel, slander, defamation. Again, in today's world, very litigious society, we do see personal injury becoming more of a topic. And again, we'll kind of talk through where some of those limitations may lie. And then lastly, again, the defense costs. This is just important because attorneys are very expensive today, and having this coverage built into the homeowners will just make sure that if, again, there is a claim, your clients have some team of professionals to help navigate those situations. So next, on the liability, we see medical payments and personal injury protection. So personal injury protection is really only available on the auto policy. And the big difference here is they're going to cover additional costs such as income that may be lost after an auto accident. Medical payments really are just going to be for your copays and deductibles, and this can be used for you as the driver and or guest in your vehicle. The nice thing about medical payments and personal injuries, these are no fault coverages. So again, does not matter who's at fault, your clients can use this coverage. See, a lot of clients maybe misunderstand this, but it's a great way to potentially shift some of the exposure a client may have. They don't have great medical insurance. So maybe they have high health insurance deductibles or they have no health insurance. Getting the right medical payments or personal injury coverage on the auto can be a good way to, again, potentially supplement some of those costs. However, on the homeowners, the medical payments is only for guests on premise. So this cannot be used for anyone in the household. And it's really just a goodwill gesture to help your guest maybe take care of smaller medical bills that may arise. Again, maybe they need to go to urgent care, get a few stitches, and they have a high health insurance deductible. Your homeowners can pay that out so they hopefully don't sue you to get into your personal liability, which we just discussed. Who's at high risk for liability? A lot of times people just assume if you have a dog, which is one thing, but as you'll note here, there's a lot of different activities that clients can participate in that increases their risk. So one of those is sitting on a charitable board. A lot of people don't know that when you sit on a non-for-profit as a director or officer, there's actually some personal liability that can be brought on to you if there's decisions that are incorrectly made. Maybe there's not enough security at a certain event that you host and someone's injured. So it really can open up a large hole in the planning if not kind of discussed and transferred to the right insurance company. Another one is that kind of goes in hand with charitable boards is hosting large parties. So again, those clients that love to host fundraisers at their home, it's important to understand what liability comes with that and maybe shifting some of that liability to like a special events policy that covers additional guests being on premise and even maybe some additional liquor exposure that may exist. So again, these are just a list. There's a lot more that goes into it, but as you can see, these all really do poke holes in the insurance policy, and if not appropriately addressed in planning, can quickly unravel everything you guys are doing from an investment standpoint because they may have to use the funds to pay for these claims that are uninsured. So speaking of claims, let's talk about claims in action. Before I jump, do we have any questions or anything at this point?
There is one question about D&O covering charitable boards.
So there's two types of coverage. So there's one that the board should carry for all the directors and officers, but then if that limit is exhausted, maybe it's a large lawsuit or there's a lot of situations where that limit goes quickly, then the individual's personal assets could be out there. And that's where having additional protection on their umbrella policy can provide up to $1 million in payout if they were each awarded like a certain damage amount for their participation in that activity.
Okay. A couple more questions just came in.
Awesome.
So from Sri, it says, does umbrella insurance cover some of these risks?
It does, and we'll talk through that a little more down here, but we'll kind of take a deep dive. But yes, it definitely covers some of these.
Okay, great. Joseph asked, can you still be covered if their acts that were caused by the injury were illegal? Oh, that's a good
That's all
question.
going to depend. One of the worst phrases in insurance is it depends. It's because every claim situation has, different activities, but the main thing is there can't be intent behind the activity or the action. So if there was an intent, that usually causes it to be excluded. But if it's truly an act that was not intentional. I do joke that insurance covers stupidity. So there are situations where we can see coverage apply.
I like that. Okay, Marty asked, could you expound on risks with having household employees other than if they are injured on premises?
Yeah, so household employees, I'll use a nanny for an example. Maybe they drive the car. So if they have your children in the car and they're in a bad accident, uninsured motorists can be really important to make sure that your kids have enough coverage available. And I can talk about that in some later slides in more detail. Making sure that, again, going back to that auto, that they're listed as drivers on the auto policy. So your liability covers the nanny while they're driving your vehicle and that the umbrella would respond while they're driving. But then there's other employees, like maybe you guys are doing a rent or the clients are doing a renovation, those and they're on premise, even if it's for, 6 to 12 months, those type of individuals should have their own coverage. So it's really going to depend the type of employee, but it's the three coverages would be the auto policy for the homeowners, making sure, again, a workers' comp policy is in place for their injuries. It will help also pay for future lost income if they can no longer work. And then we talk about on the umbrella, the employment practices liability, which would be if your client sued for sexual harassment, discrimination, or wrongful termination, which again, it's really important that if your clients do have staff, that they have very specific onboarding and exiting reviews. That way they're, help avoid some of those claims that may arise, and really treating that employee like a business can help in those employment practice situations.
Excellent. Okay, Scott asked, how does your software identify these risks?
So right now, most of these are just in the notes section where we just kind of bring it to your and your client's attention that they need to talk to an insurance professional about these. So it's not specifically calling it out, but if we do see them listed, like if there was directors and officers on there, there will be a checkbox in the future that specifically calls it. But right now, it's more in the notes section as a conversation piece for your client to bring to the insurance professional to discuss.
Perfect. Oh, and I love this next question. So this next question says, is being a high income earner also make you at a higher risk for lawsuits? And if you guys were here, Megan's last webinar actually talked about this. So I know the answer, but I'll let Megan answer.
It does, but at the end of the day, they're going to have a target on their back, and having the appropriate liability coverage is important because if it's just your clients, dollars fighting, they could potentially hire their own defense team once the insurance is exhausted. But we also see just like who they hang out with. One of the claims will actually talks through high earners and how quickly a claim can add up when there's multiple high earners in your friend group. So again, whether it's your client that's the high earner or maybe they just hang out with high earners, there's a lot to consider. And again, the appropriate coverage, whether it's for them being the high earner and or hanging out with high earners, will be discussed, but definitely a great question.
Megan, do you want to take any scenarios or do you want to keep rolling with the slides and then we can come back to more questions in maybe 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, let's do the claims, see if we answer anything, and then we can go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. So claims. So this one is who let the dogs out. This was a claim covered by Chubb where an insured's dog got out of the home and unfortunately knocked over a cyclist. The cyclist had to go to the ER. They were hospitalized for a few days and then they were discharged for rehabilitation. They ended up having 650,000 in medical expenses and pain and suffering. The key here is the broad homeowners coverage with no animal liability exclusion. We are starting to see insurance companies put in either limitations for animal liability, can be anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000, or we see them exclude liability depending on the dog breed. So if it's an aggressive breed. So again, if your clients have dogs in household, these situations occur, and making sure there's no limits within that situation is an important conversation. Next is the spring break trip gone wrong. So this client had a daughter that was on spring break overseas, and they were driving a golf cart when they hit another party and they were sued for the bodily injuries that were sustained. The key here is that this happened overseas. So Chubb was able to provide their internal claims team in the US as well as engage their multi-international team to help defend this client. And not only were they able to help defend the client, they were able to help pay out. The demand was $2 million for this specific situation. And again, the key here is this worldwide liability that may not always be present in specific liability policies. Next is the downward dog disaster. So this is going to be a great example of how your clients' everyday lives can even pose exposures from a liability perspective. So this client was participating in a yoga class. They went from a balancing yoga pose to another, and she fell into the individual next to her, fracturing and dislocating the ankle. They sustained some other injuries. Due to the unique nature of the claim, an independent medical examiner was brought in to kind of look through these injuries and confirm a limp and inability to walk normally even after physical therapy. This one, Chubb actually did a little more digging than just quickly writing a check. They kind of brought in their own investigation team, and during their investigation, they obtained surveillance video that countered the allegations and showed that the injured individual actually had no problem walking. So not only was having the appropriate liability important because Chubb continued to work on the client's behalf until the claim was settled, but they also, again, weren't just writing checks and wanted to make sure that what the claimant was stating happened was truly the case. So the client had an appropriate payout. And that, again, is kind of where the right liability can help make sure that there's enough coverage and that we're taking care of the appropriate injuries, not just, what the client says or doesn't say. This one is that high earner one. So this client had left a gate open on a private road, but they on that road was a railroad track, and unfortunately, by leaving that gate unlocked, a Jeep carrying 4 men attempted to cross the railroad and were hit by the train. As a result of that, there was a demand made from the 3 estates that sued for wrongful death. One was for 30 million, and then the additional was for 60 million for the survivors. So again, this is where having the right defense costs becomes important, but also making sure that your clients have the right liability based on who they hang out with. And just because this is a potentially farm property in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean that there's not going to be the potential for, again, the wrong vehicle to be on the tracks at the wrong time. So this really just goes to show that wherever your client is, regardless of kind of what is or isn't in their control, they need to take the right precautions. And locking the gate would have potentially avoided this as well. So here's some examples from another insurance company, Pure. Again, we're going to see this dog bite claim. I bring this up a lot because dogs, doesn't matter where your client is in life. They can be, starting life, in the middle of life, at the end of life, and dogs can really derail all the planning that you guys are working so hard on. So this one, a woman was delivering mail and accidentally sent to her home. She was attacked and bitten by the neighbor's dog. A $5.6 million was awarded to the woman, and then additional payouts to the woman's husband, which was a little unique. Most of that having to do with the state they're in. But again, just showing how quickly these injuries can add up. Another was a car accident. So a 19-year-old sustained back injuries from a car accident, $3.4 million verdict. When we see accidents with teens, we do tend to see higher verdicts because they have a lot of life potential that may be adjusted due to that accident. So when your clients have young drivers in household, it's really important to review not only those auto limits, but again, that umbrella policy to make sure there's no gaps. And then the contract worker on the job. So this goes back to one of those questions of, when there's people, employees on premise. This was a glass installer that fell while walking at the private home, suffering a spinal fracture. They were sued for 1.2 million. Some states do have work comp and covered within the homeowners. Others do not. So this is a state by state coverage and how that verdict would have played out. But it is just important that if there's workers on your client's premise, that they make sure they have their own liability and workers' comp for those individuals doing the job. Next is the playground. So playgrounds are actually a huge cause of loss. I think it was like over 70% of families have a playground at their home. I mean, this was one where a group of children were playing on the swing set. Unfortunately, one fell off the slide, and the child's injuries that were sustained ended up being long term, and the homeowner was legally responsible to pay the damage. The key here is just having an umbrella in place. So again, this family didn't have a lot of assets, so typically they would have assumed the 300,000 would have been enough. However, luckily they had a good insurance provider that offered the umbrella, which the client did purchase, making sure that they didn't have to pay anything out of pocket, because as you can see, the settlement was 1.2 million, which again came close to their max limit, but again allowed them to not really sustain any change in lifestyle. Next is renters. I feel like renters is one that's often overlooked, especially when it comes to liability. A lot of people just are like, hey, per my contract with my landlord, I only need 100,000, check. 100,000 is just not enough. This example is a great reason why. So this client was living on the top floor of an apartment. They went to take a bath and unfortunately fell asleep while the bath was filling up, and it flooded several apartments below. The neighbors had some outages with their electronics, and it resulted in even more damage. So unfortunately, the client only had 100,000 in coverage and had to pay out $50,000 of their own money for the additional damage that was not covered. Something here for an additional 20, maybe $50 a year, they could have gotten up to 500,000 in coverage, and again would have confidently covered this claim, and potentially most that would arise in a renter situation. But liability is one of the cheapest things clients can buy, especially renters. It's probably closer to $20 a year to go from 100,000 to 500,000. So don't just rely on the landlord contracts to determine what your clients need. Really look at what kind of assets they currently have, what's their future earning potential, and how they may need to adjust those limits specifically for them. And then an auto accident. So a client was driving on the freeway. They unfortunately hit a minivan that had 6 passengers. 3 were severely injured, and our driver was found 100% at fault. So again, this is where having an umbrella policy is really important, because the auto policy only provided 250,000 per person, 500,000 per accident. And in this situation, one of the 3 injured people had 100,000 or had $300,000 worth of damage, meaning the auto was only going to cover the first 250, potentially leaving the client out $50,000. So again, by having that umbrella, it picked up the 50,000 plus the additional that was uncovered by the per accident loss. But again, just shows how quickly this additional liability may be needed in an umbrella situation. And then reality versus perception. So there was a study done by ACE Insurance that asked individuals if there was a claim that occurred, kind of what their thoughts of how high the claim would be. And it was a little startling at kind of what they found from a perspective of, I think it's around 13% thought could be anywhere from 5 to 10 million. And in today's marketplace, most people have less than a $5 million umbrella. And, over half thought that the claims could be 5 million or more. And as you see here by claims that are shown, there's a lot of claims that occur over, a million or $5 million. And I can tell you the claims you're seeing here are not all people that are worth, 20, $30 million. A lot of these just have to do with, again, where that child may be going in life, kind of the negligence on the party that caused it. So you don't have to be a millionaire. Your clients don't have to be a millionaire to be sued like one. And this, again, just represents that even in large cases, we see those numbers add up quickly. So why are we seeing clients face, these large lawsuits and just lawsuits in general after accidents? So when there's an auto or a claim, the liability is going to typically cover medical and rehabilitation expenses, current and future lost wages. So again, I think that's one that a lot of people don't think about. And depending on, again, where your earnings are or where your friends' earnings are that may have been injured, can really have these claims add up quickly. And then emotional pain and suffering. This is only in certain states, but this is again where we see large dollar amounts associated with pain and suffering, whether that's nerve damage, the individual gets headaches, they have paralysis, the list kind of goes on, but really can start to add up depending on if they experience one or multiple of these pains and sufferings. The other is the complexity of lawsuits. So now we're seeing new types of claims arise. One is like e-bikes. So we're seeing large injuries when people are riding those and maybe they get involved in an auto accident with a true vehicle. Social inflation is something else that we're seeing a lot of, and just really, the jurors have become desensitized to large verdicts, and a lot of that has to do with just the media impact. And a nuclear verdict, which is over a $10 million verdict, has just become more common in today's place. We're also seeing medical cost increase, obviously. And then there's something with a public sentiment. So for the individuals that deal with business owners, it's really important, take off our personal hat for a minute, but when there's businesses involved, we see extremely high verdicts. Of 88% of jurors think that companies should take all precautions, no matter how impactful or costly, to ensure the safety of their product. In fact, 58% say that the company bears some responsibility, even when a customer is injured while misusing the product. So again, for those business owners, it's important that they have the right commercial coverage in place, that they have the right business structure, because if the business structure isn't appropriate, it could potentially pierce and come after their personal assets, at which case, again, now we're dealing with an even larger issue. So the public can really also drive how big these lawsuits get, and companies tend to get the brunt end of it. Then there's just litigation costs. We see a lot of attorney tactics and litigation funding becoming more sophisticated. Attorneys spend over $1 billion on advertising every year. We also see attorneys venue shopping at this point, where they look for judges with track records favoring generous rewards. So again, insurance claims is no longer just a simple process. There is politics involved. And again, that comes with emotional appeal and just the sue happy culture in which we currently reside in. So before we jump into insurance solutions, I probably have a decent amount of questions that I might have brought up or didn't answer. Do we want to jump into those real quick?
Yes, I think we do. We have 8 open questions. So the first one is a scenario type question. And this scenario is from Peter. It's an unmarried couple living together in a home. The female has 5 million of excess liability coverage from work. Would this excess policy cover the male partner at all?
So that's going to be really important on the policy language, because some umbrellas do cover household members. So as long as that other individual is either on the deed or something like that, there could be coverage. If it's an excess policy, then again, if the unmarried person is listed on the auto as a driver, that umbrella should pick it up. But that's again going to be very specific to the definition of insured within that contract. And I do recommend that client reach out to their HR, and they'll be quickly able to answer that question for you.
Mhm. This next one says, how common is it to have a claim that actually exceeds the insurance limit?
Um, I think that's a hard question to answer, because again, the situation's all going to be different. If one dog bites a kid's face, it could be a 5 million, where that same dog could bite an adult's leg and it could be a couple 100,000. So, who and what is in that situation is really going to determine how drastic probably those claims can be. Coming from a family of attorneys, what I will say is, you know, someone just can't say, I'm going to sue you for $5 million. There has to be a reason. There has to be an associated dollar amount to kind of how and why they're coming up with that. So again, if your clients don't need to carry a 10 million umbrella if their net worth isn't around that. But if your client has a net worth of 5 to 10 million, or even, maybe let's just say 7, they should carry a $10 million umbrella, because they have future assets and future earnings that they're looking to protect. And that's where maybe having a slightly higher umbrella than what their current assets are make a little more sense.
That's a really good point. This one comes from Catherine. I've recently updated my umbrella and they gave me a hassle because I have college-age children. Could you say more about this? And at what point in net worth do we look to high-end carriers like Chubb, AIG, Pure, etc.?
So two things. College kids, you definitely need an umbrella. I also think, again, not an attorney here, but understanding how vehicles are titled. If you send them off to school, just helping with negligent entrustment lawsuits that tend to really add up quickly. But the typical thing with college kids is there's additional discounts that can be added. So I don't know why they would have given you pushback on wanting to add additional liability outside the fact that insurance companies don't love college kids because there's just a large liability exposure, but I've never heard of like them not allowing coverage. But they may not want to give you too much. So they might have said, hey, we're only going to give you an additional million here because we don't want to take on that possibility of a $5 million lawsuit. We'd rather you keep that exposure on you, but we're comfortable maybe going up a million. So we have seen insurance companies restrict how much liability they're giving people if your assets don't qualify for certain amounts. So again, if you have only $1 million in assets, they're not going to give you 5 million, where 5 years ago, it didn't matter how much assets you had. If you wanted 5 million, an insurance company would issue a $5 million umbrella. So I do think, again, some of that just might have to do with the limitations. Direct writers also just aren't super comfortable giving more than like 2 or 3 million. And when I say direct writers, that's like State Farm, American Family, again, great companies, but they just don't have a huge liability appetite, where a USAA, a Safeco, even Cincinnati, Acuity, they're all going to be comfortable going up to that 5 million. And then over 5 million is where we really see the Chubbs, AIG, Cincinnati also plays in that space, become more necessary. And so to answer the second part of that question is, when do you look to the high end, insurers? There's a few different places. One, if your assets or your net worth's over 5 million, because you really do need an umbrella that can cater to that. And there's only a few markets that can do that. Secondly, those, how do they want to experience a claim? Some people don't mind going through a claim, having to kind of do extra legwork, a little back and forth. Typically with claims, an insurance company will pay the actual cash value up front. And then once your client replaces the item, they give them a replacement cost check. So there's usually two checks exchanged, where like a Chubb or an AIG may give your client the full replacement cost up front. So they don't have to do as much back and forth. They also tend to allow for contractors to have a little more legroom in what the cost. So again, a Safeco is probably going to have, and do not quote me on these numbers, but they may allow like $10 per hour for a contractor, where Chubb may allow up to $25 an hour for a contractor. So Chubb and the AIG just understand that there's additional cost that comes with craftsmanship. So if your clients do live more of a individual lifestyle, that they like custom quality, they like the only contractor that they use to come to their house, and they don't want to have to get 3 bids at time of a claim, that's when paying a little more for the right insurance company becomes important, because those are the experiences that you're going to see a difference in, mainly in getting one bid or having to get 3 bids, and the insurance company choosing what contractor out of those three you work with.
That's a huge differentiator, the client experience.
Yes.
Okay,
And there's a
this
lot of wealthy
one.
people that don't need a great experience. So again, I think that's where who the client is makes a difference in how they want to invest in
For sure.
insurance.
So this one comes from Mike, and then we also have an anonymous that kind of overlaps. So the question is, how big of an umbrella policy is needed? And how do you calculate that type of coverage?
Yeah, so it's going to depend by the state, but it's really the creditor available assets. So if a creditor can go after them, there's most likely the ability for a judge to deem them as collateral at time of an uninsured or underinsured claim. So that's kind of like the rule of thumb. So that means the 401ks are pretty well protected until your clients are, starting to draw on them. Then it could be seen as income, but again, that varies by state. If really any liquid assets they have, so liquidity in their home, if what they have with you all, those laws better than I do of what a creditor can go after or not go after. So my rule of thumb is really, what is their assets that a creditor can go after, and then what's their future income. And that's a really hard one to like draw in on, but rule of thumb there is, if you have a young entrepreneur or a young business owner, a doctor that's going through medical school, what does the average doctor make a year? Maybe kind of just going there and saying, hey, right now they're in a bunch of debt, but in 3 years they're going to be making $1 million a year. Then let's maybe give them $1 million or $2 million umbrella. The cost difference is going to be $200 a year, maybe. So again, pennies on the dollar for what you're able to protect in the long run. And as we just kind of talked about with the younger drivers in household, insurance companies don't love to jump umbrella limits either. So if we know our client's going to be making a lot, sometimes stair stepping the umbrella. So when they're in that full, hey, I'm making $5 million, a year, whatever that amount may be, then we can get them the $5 million umbrella for their protection. And I meant 5 million in assets, not a year. That would be really nice though. So that's where, again, being able just to appropriately stair step the limit. But it is a case by case basis. It's not a black and white answer, but liability is the cheapest thing your clients are going to buy. And so that's where, again, just get the quotes for the extra million to 5 million, see what that looks like, and then, have your client decide if investing an extra $10 or $15 a month is worth 3 to 5 million more in coverage.
That was great. Thank you, Megan. That actually answered a handful of these questions. So
Okay,
if you would like to, we can jump back into the presentation and then circle back to the questions in a little bit.
perfect.
Awesome.
So now we're going to talk about how we transfer all of this that I've brought to your attention to the insurance company. So the first thing is just the different places your clients can buy liability. So first is the homeowner. So again, whether that's they own a home, they're a renter, they're a condo, they're a landlord. And I want to call out the renter real quick. The renter can be, again, that unmarried situation where maybe that other individual isn't on the house deed anywhere. They're not on the homeowner's policy. So that significant other that's just living in the house at this time may want to get a renter's policy for their personal property and their personal liability, depending on how the homeowner's policy reads, that's covering the structure in which they're living. So renters can get a little more broad than I think what people tend to think of there. And as you can see, personal liability for a renter is very important. Medical payments, again, those smaller injuries that may arise due to guests being on premise or they just trip, maybe need to get a few stitches, that's where this can come in. And then that personal injury for things like deformation and whatnot. Next is the vehicle. So this is going to be cars, motorcycles, watercrafts. Also think about motorized vehicles, the bikes, scooters. If there's a lot more things in today's world that have motors on them. And once you put a motor on it, it really puts it into an auto type policy and removes any type of liability that may have been provided in the past under a homeowner's when it was just like a normal bicycle versus a motorized bicycle. Again, we want bodily injury. This is what's going to pay out to the other party when our clients cause the accident and that other individual has medical bills and lost wages. We also want to make sure there's those medical payments. So again, my client can have a couple $1,000s to pay for their co-pays after the accident. Maybe they need, they have high deductibles, they need therapy, whatever that may be, depending on the state, if it's personal injury coverage. And then uninsured and underinsured motorists. This is one that I see a lot of times have lower limits than the bodily injury to kind of save on costs, and or clients just don't understand the true need here. 1 in 7 drivers in the US has no auto insurance. And if your client is involved in an accident with one of those drivers, this is the coverage that's going to pay out. And again, make sure they're not calling you to figure out, hey, my wife can no longer take care of the kids. We have to hire a nanny. I'm going to need $60,000 a year to do that. If they have uninsured motorists, that could potentially be covered under this coverage versus them having to call you and figure out how they're going to rearrange their investments to now cover the cost of a nanny. And then the umbrella policy. So again, going over the home and vehicles at time of a loss when those limits are exhausted. There's uninsured and underinsured liability, and we'll talk through these more in this next slide. So I'm not going to dig in too much here, but really the umbrella, in my opinion, is the bow to not only the insurance, but all the planning that happens, because if the estate documents, the LLC, are not appropriately used, examples are those LLCs. Maybe the client has a rental portfolio, they put the name or they deed the property into that LLC, but then they use their personal credit card every year to make the insurance payment for the landlord policy. Well, they've now just pierced that corporate veil. And so making sure, again, that umbrella is also covering that potential rental property is really important. And again, when I say the bow on planning, that's what I mean. And just understanding how everything the client has going on, potentially if there's a liability tied back to them personally, how can this umbrella help make sure that we're not looking at their personal assets and we're able to use the insurance company's money to pay out. So just some quick myths and facts about insurance, specifically the umbrella. My homeowners and auto insurance is enough. As we've seen with the claims, that's just not the truth. And, we see a lot of times where if that 300,000 is exhausted, where are the clients going to get the money? Again, if they're working with the advisor, you may be the only place that they have money to get from. And what happens when they're coming to you asking for that? What does that do to planning? What does that do? Again, if this is your largest client in the firm, what does that do to the firm? So on and so forth. Umbrella is only for wealthy people. Again, you don't have to be a millionaire to get sued like one. So even if these are your, everyday income type people, they probably need an umbrella more than your wealthy clients because they can't afford for their wages to be garnished due to uninsured coverage or uninsured coverage. So again, definitely not just for the wealthy people. And then that there's limited benefits. And as we'll talk through these next slides, that is just so far from the truth. And depending on where your clients are, what they do day to day, an umbrella policy really can just be that nice peace of mind to allow them to live life the way they want to. So this is just a quick illustration of kind of what's covered by an umbrella policy. Obviously, personal injury, bodily injury, there's some slander, defamation, and again, this is all going to be covered over kind of the underlying limits on the home and auto type policies. What's not covered by an umbrella? So not more importantly, what aren't we going to cover? Business activities. So again, your business owners that may have clients to their homes, or run a business out of their home, there might be exclusions. And again, if it's not covered by the home, it's not going to be covered by an excess liability policy. And business is always that gray area. Mental anguish is not always covered. There's no flood damage. For some reason, people tend to think an umbrella may also provide additional property coverage, and that's not true. Umbrella is specifically extra liability coverage, and then it doesn't, provide any type of coverage for members of your household that where acts were intentionally caused. And then you'll see here again, this injured, sustained by a contracted worker. These workers need to have their own coverage through their business. So here's a great example of when I was in insurance, something I would see all the time, and our holistic plan tool does help call this out, but this is just a gap in coverage from what the client carries on their auto policy or their homeowner's policy and what the umbrella requires. Because again, this is excess in to what your clients currently have. So an example here was, the client had an auto accident and or homeowner's accident where an individual had 300,000 in damage. Unfortunately, in the first situation, the umbrella does not kick in until your client comes out of pocket 200,000 because the 100,000 is all we have here on the auto and or on the homeowner's policy. The umbrella that would allow your client not to pay anything out of pocket is when these underlying limits are met. So either the 250,000 per person, 500,000 per accident, or 300,000 in liability. And then the other one would be the 300,000 in liability. And I apologize. I have a sick kid here today, so I have a little bit of a entertainment. The next that we're going to talk through is examples of when the umbrella policy responded or, wouldn't respond and how this just affects your client's personal assets. So this example is where a client had a judgment of $800,000 and the person only had $250,000 in auto coverage. So one individual was severely injured and your client had to come out of pocket $550,000 to make up for those injuries. However, if they just would have invested in an umbrella policy, they would have only paid for the premium of that umbrella, as the auto policy would have covered the first 250,000 and then the umbrella would have covered the additional 550,000. Next is a auto or a homeowner's example where again a client had a dead tree fall on the neighbor's home. They experienced $600,000 worth of damage. By not having an umbrella policy, their homeowners only covered the first 300,000 and then the umbrella, or sorry, they had to come out of pocket an additional 300,000. Whereas with the umbrella, their homeowners covered the first 300,000 and then the umbrella picked up the additional 300,000. And this is a really important slide, excess liability versus umbrella liability. These terms get used interchangeably in our industry, but the truth of the matter is they're not the same, and there is a big difference in how these respond. So excess liability is when the umbrella or the excess is only going to respond if there's underlying coverage. So this example, client was sued for personal injury claim due to defamation. They did not have personal injury coverage on their homeowners, so their umbrella would not respond either, and the client was out of pocket $300,000. However, client B had an umbrella policy, so while they did not have personal injury on their homeowners, their umbrella was able to provide first dollar coverage in this situation because personal injury was a coverage on the umbrella. So this is just an example of how different types of insurance policies respond differently to the same claim, same underlying situation, but just different language within the higher up liability. So when do clients need umbrella insurance? Obviously, asset protection is something we've talked a lot about today. When coverage goes beyond the limits, so again, that 6-car pileup, the dog, has a bad day and gets out. The list kind of goes on and how those underlying limits may not be enough. And then risk assessment. What your clients do every day makes a big difference in their needs. So if they work from home, they don't like to go out and they're just a homebody, then they may not need a ton of liability. But if they, you know, commute to or from work, and especially if it's a long commute, or maybe they like to participate again in the community, or they like to host people at their house, whatever that may be, can drastically change what their needs from a liability standpoint are. And then Chubb did a study that showed 92% of people are concerned with the size verdict against them. However, only 36% have actual liability insurance. So again, this is a great place to start with your clients if you're not already having these conversations and making sure that they at least have some type of umbrella policy for those types of verdicts. And then what to look for in an insurance company when it comes to an umbrella policy. So offers appropriate limits. Like I discussed, most insurance companies are not comfortable offering over 5 million in coverage. However, there are about 7 to 10 that will comfortably offer up to 100 million for the right client. And then you can also stack umbrella policy. So sometimes, like we'll see where USAA will offer 5 million, and then Pure may do another 5 million over that USAA umbrella, and then your client's able to get a full 10. So there's ways to get creative. Uninsured and underinsured motorists. So again, back to that stat of 1 in 7 drivers in the US has no auto insurance. And if your clients, maybe the whole family's in the car and they're hit by that driver, that can exhaust the liability on the auto quickly. So having coverage on the umbrella can just provide a nice peace of mind. This coverage can also be used if your clients are in an accident while they're a bicyclist or a pedestrian. So those clients that live in New York and Chicago and ride and walk to work, again, very important coverage. While they may not be auto drivers all the time, these policy languages can still provide coverage. The right umbrella is going to provide worldwide liability. So for clients that travel outside the US, this can become really important as a lot of liability in the home and auto side only provide liability in the United States and its territory. So again, depending on where clients go, worldwide liability in the umbrella is important. These next layers are only usually available for clients who umbrella limits are 5 million and more. So one of those is supplemental defense. This is really nice when your client has a large lawsuit and maybe they have an attorney that they use for their daily lives that they want to kind of shadow the case. This supplemental defense can provide dollars to that attorney to kind of shadow the insurance company's defense team. Third-party liability, I'm just going to bring this back to this college situation that we discussed earlier. So third-party liability can provide extended liability for your household members when the other party does not have enough insurance. So an example would be your college kid is away, they're at a friend's house and they get severely injured. Maybe they're swimming and they hit their head and the friend only has $1 million in liability. And now your child can no longer go back to school. They're not going to be the doctor that they were supposed to be. And overall, the judgment's going to be $2 million. Instead of having to sue your friend, collect, or garnish their wages, this third party liability could help cover that difference. So your umbrella would actually respond and provide that additional $1 million for your child's needs that arose due to somebody else's negligence. Then there's employment practices liability. So again, for these individuals that you work with that have household employees really full time, this is going to help provide coverage for things like sexual harassment, discrimination, wrongful termination. And this coverage is less than $500 a year for about $500,000 in coverage. So nothing crazy in a cost perspective, but again, nice peace of mind in the litigious society we live in. And then nonprofit D&O. So again, your clients that participate on non-for-profit boards, having some additional coverage here can be really important. I at one point participated in a neighborhood board that was a non-for-profit, and we would host a parade every year. Unfortunately, someone passed away at the parade due to natural cause, but we were sued, and they tried to state that there wasn't enough medical, that the roads were too blocked for people to get there. And had that been found the case, we could have been personally liable as the individual was a high income earner. So it doesn't even have to be a public board. It can be something like a neighborhood board that people sit on that can really cause their liability to quickly open up. And $1 million in coverage is around $500 a year to add this to an umbrella. So again, not a lot. Depending on the board, underwriters do look at that. So if it's a super controversial board, your clients may not be able to get coverage, but in most situations, we see this as a pretty easy add-on when necessary. So how much does it cost? Obviously, we've talked about, kind of what type of claims we see, but as you can see here, I've said a lot, it's cheap. And when I say high risk is $2,500 a year, this is going to be your client that has 2 homes, a young driver, maybe a watercraft. They probably sit on a board, and this is about a $5 million umbrella for $2,500 a year. Low risk, even at $500 a year, that's still probably high. That's including that uninsured motorist, like I talked about. I see a standard $1 million umbrella for just, a married couple, no kids, being $200 a year. So really affordable, especially if they're considered low risk. And we've talked about this in one of the questions, but when we're talking about the umbrella limit, the assets that the client has, so what they kind of have to lose at time of a lawsuit is important, and then future income and what their future income could be is a limit that we like to include in the discussion when the appropriate limit. And again, this is not a conversation you as the advisor need to have with your client. This is just one that you need to tee up for your client to have with the right insurance broker or agent. So 5 steps to crafting the comprehensive liability coverage. Consult with a specialist. Again, you guys do not need to be the specialist. You do need to know a few that you can refer your clients to, but finding a firm that understands the complexities and works with the carriers that can offer solutions from your everyday mass affluent client to your high net worth client would be ideal. Compare coverage options, resist the temptation to have your client go with the cheapest option. That's just not always in their best interest. And cheap, just sometimes you get what you pay for. So making sure that you're helping them evaluate the true coverages. And that's again something the Holistic Plan tool can help you do, is just point out some of the liability that they may need and that notes and considerations. But what we really can help you with is making sure that the policies is integrated properly, and that there's no gaps in the underlying coverages and what the umbrella needs in order to respond. And again, when I was an agent, this is something that I saw all the time, especially when they had maybe the home and umbrella with State Farm and the auto with Geico, and or, just had it kind of piecemeal together. There tends to be gaps quicker than you can think of. And again, our program can just help make sure that it's all aligning from a liability standpoint. And then opt for comprehensive coverage. So again, understanding what your client's needs are, the appropriate limit, whether that's 2, 5, 10, 25 million. And as you buy liability, it actually gets cheaper. So that's unlike other things in insurance, that the more you buy, it usually gets more expensive. Liability can actually get cheaper by the million as you go up the scale. And then implement safety measures, because at the end of the day, none of your clients have time for a claim. In helping them understand how to prevent claims from occurring will help just make this a lot easier and allow them to potentially get better rates on their insurance. So whether that's just, having a safety expert review the swimming pools, tree houses, those type of things, making sure that when they entertain, they don't let intoxicated guests leave, or like we discussed, if they are hosting non-for-profit events, that they maybe have a special events policy. So again, the list goes on. And again, the right insurance partner can help you navigate these unique situations that may arise with clients. And then, what we've learned today, hopefully you've all learned a lot, but really just understanding the basics of personal liability, real life insights. You guys can help explain to your clients again how quickly these claims can add up. And it does matter who and what they hang out with and, their day-to-day lives. The insurance solutions, again, and liability is the cheapest thing these individuals can buy, and just the importance and really just the vast coverage that is available for clients. And then again, just strategic partnerships and understanding the steps they can take to make sure that if there is a claim, there's the right coverage and or just potentially avoiding claims with the right mitigation. And then next steps. Uh, Review your client's personal liability risk. So again, ask them if they sit on boards, understand if they have people in their house, whether it's doing work or working for them full time. Obviously you probably know if they have kids, but understand, what do their kids like to do? Do they like to have friends over? Do they go to friends' houses? Just understand kind of those different things and then discuss that with an insurance professional to help come up with the right plan for your client. And then lastly, use the Holistic Plan tool just to help you quickly identify these gaps and really start that roadmap for your client. So before I jump into that though, does anyone have any questions?
There are tons of questions. We have 22 questions.
Okay, do you want me to run through the tool first
Yeah,
so we
let's
don't
talk
run out
quickly
of
about
time?
Holistiplan,
Okay.
and what the tool does. And so we have a property and casualty insurance module on our software. It's called Home, Auto, and Umbrella. You could get started with a 7-day free trial where you can test the product. You can actually upload one of your returns or one of your declaration pages or one of your client's declarations pages to see the inputs and the outputs. So highly, highly recommend that you test that out.
And just I have up on the screen just a quick output of kind of what your clients and what you would receive. So it quickly shows you what the carrier is, their annual premium, and then the underlying coverages. So you've heard me talk about this a lot, and this is where it's just so nicely laid out for you and your client to understand what those requirements are. And if there were to be any gaps, this is where we quickly color code lay it out for you that, hey, there's either a gap in the underlying coverage. This one says to check the limits to make sure that the $1 million is enough. And based on the assets the advisor entered here, it looks good to go. It just confirms that the limits on the home and auto underlying are good. And again, they would be red if there was a gap. So just nice, quick visual for you and your clients to send to the agent so they can help you navigate and fix the policy without you having to put together in your own words what the issues are. And then here's the note section. So someone had asked kind of, do we call these out? And this is where you're going to see, again, that business activity, board of directors, and other general lifestyle considerations for them. All right, time for questions.
All right, we have plenty to choose from. Okay, so this one was from a subscriber. So I subscribe to Holistiplan. Where can I find the insurance review software? So this would be if you are in the Premium Plus tier, you'll have access to it, and you just need your administrator to go in and flip it on under the settings. So it's right under the settings. It's an on and off toggle. And we can also send a link to the how-to in the follow-up email. Okay, so this one was from Joanne. So can you explain again the difference in excess liability and umbrella coverage?
Yes, so excess liability is underlying coverage for the policy to respond. So the personal injury example I gave, personal injury is something that typically has to be endorsed onto a homeowner's policy. So if your client got sued for defamation, maybe they went online and were saying some bad things about a business that they had dealt with and that business sued them, the personal liability may, if it's not in the homeowners, then the excess liability would not respond. However, with an umbrella policy, it does provide first dollar coverage in certain situations where there's no underlying coverage. So in the situation where the client didn't have personal injury on the home, the true umbrella policy was still able to provide coverage because of the language and how that umbrella read, and that personal injury is covered within the umbrella and there's no underlying limits required. So the biggest difference is excess is only going to respond when there's underlying coverage in place, where an umbrella policy may provide coverage where there's no underlying, and that's usually specifically outlined within the first couple pages of your umbrella policy. But there are just to there some companies do say umbrella liability in their marketing when it's truly excess. So it is something that has to be slightly of a deeper dive than just taking the wording on the policy declaration.
Right. Okay, so this question is from Catherine. It said, my insurer said assets mean investments, not home equity. How do you define assets?
So again, I think it's really going to be state dependent, but for me, I consider assets what a creditor would consider an asset. So from a creditor standpoint, what could a judge see as collateral? And again, in some states, the equity in your home may not be that. In other states, like I know in Missouri, they can look at equity in your home. So if my home was paid off and I didn't have enough coverage, they could say, hey, either get a mortgage on your home and or sell your home, and we're going to give those funds to the party that I injured.
This question is from Andrew. If you have a personal liability coverage on your homeowner's policy of, say, 500K and a separate umbrella of $1 million, how much would that equal? $1 million or 1.5?
1.5.
Okay,
So it's an addition to.
awesome. And with that, we're right at 3 o'clock. So what we'll do as next steps is we will send out the recording, we'll send out the slides, and we'll also get all of these questions over to Megan, and Megan can shoot over some answers. We'll include all of that in our recap email, so keep an eye out for that. Usually it goes out within the next 1 to 2 days, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Megan. As always, phenomenal presentation. I learned so much from you, so really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll have our next one on home in November. So if you guys like this and you want to learn more about home, keep your eyes and ears out for that email.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.